Good, how are you?
Wow, I feel so studious, excited to be here. Awesome. All right, so I want to introduce myself to you first, as I haven't been here the past couple weeks. We've been on training. My name is Greg Joinville, Officer Joinville, Greg Joinville. Right now, I'm just Greg. That's it. Okay. I'm here to inform you guys of what we do here and answer any questions you have when it comes to use of force. I've been here for approximately 24 years. I did a couple of years at the House of Correction before I came here. I did 15 years overnights while my wife's a school teacher here in the city, so I have 4 kids. I worked overnights, she worked days, and then we had a little small period of time in between. We get to see each other in the hallway if I wasn't sleeping or she wasn't dealing with the kids. But that's just the way it was. Loved my time on the job here, loved the time I had on the job here. Did a lot of cool things, met a lot of good people, okay? Have a lot of close friends. About 8-9 years ago, they asked me to come up here to training. I've been up here in training now for about 8 years. I do all your use of force stuff, the DT, the firearms. I know you guys have a lot of firearms questions. I'd love to answer those for you too at some point in time. And I'm also part of the use of force committee here also with a couple other officers here. So wear a lot of hats in this division, but I love what I do. I never thought I'd enjoy teaching, but I absolutely love it. What I'd like to say is in my classes, I've done this a lot. If you're thinking of a question, okay, ask the question, because that means someone else is thinking of it also. And you know how that goes. It's like, I don't know if I want to ask that question because it's kind of silly. But someone else is thinking about the same question, and they ask you. It's like, I was thinking the same thing. If you have questions, folks, just ask them. Ask them. No big deal. That's why we're here. We're here to answer your questions. All right? My partner here.
Let's go. My name is Jensen Martinez. Grew up Maine, South Worcester. Very proud of that. I've been a police officer for roughly close to 18 years. Been assigned to our training division here in 2012. Just like Officer Joinville says, you can call me Jensen. Been an instructor for our use of force, defensive tactics. That's what DT is, defensive tactics. We like to use a lot of acronyms here. Today we're just going to be going over a few things. This is basically the curriculum that we teach new recruits in the police academy, just kind of going over some things. Obviously, the academy is a lot longer than one class session with 2 or 3 hours or so, but we're going to try to give some of the best stuff that we can for you. And just like Officer Joinville says, we would just want to make sure that you guys' questions are answered tonight to the best of our ability. If for some reason we don't have those answers to provide you tonight, we will try our best to make sure those answers are found for you at some point. But we'll go over some of the stuff that we carry on our duty belt just later on in the slideshow presentation, specifically when it comes to the use of force model and how we instruct and how we pass that information so that we can make better decisions on the road as police officer to keep everybody safe. With that being said, I'd also like to introduce my other friend and partner with all of us here, Officer Mike Wilson.
How you doing? I'm Mike Wilson. I'm in my 26th year. I've spent most of my time on the job in uniform, working on patrol. I have been doing background. I did backgrounds for 10 years, background investigations for our new candidates. I did 6 years as a school resource officer, and I've been in training for the past 3 years. So in training, we all have specialties, and we'll go over, again, we're going to go over use of force, but there's a lot of different specialties within use of force. And one that we all have in common is we're all defensive tactics instructors. So we'll go over some of that stuff with you. But again, like Greg said, ask questions. There's 3 of us up here right now. We probably should be able to answer the question, but if not, we'll get it to you.
So real fast, I like to make my classes very interactive, okay? So people aren't falling asleep in the class or anything like that, okay? So just ask the questions, anything you want to ask, just throw it out there. We'll give you the answers the best that we can, okay? You want to call us on our bluff, go for it. We'll just talk about it. That's why we're here, correct? We all want to learn, okay? So my first question to you is, when you think of use of force when it comes to law enforcement, what do you think? What first comes to your mind? Anything, give me something. What first comes to your mind when you think of use of force with law enforcement?
Were you pointing at me?
Sure.
Firearms.
Firearms, okay. What else?
Self-defense, I guess.
Self-defense? Okay, we'll go with that. Go ahead, sir.
Taser.
Taser, there we go. All our tools. Sir, what do you got? You're wearing a Bruins hat, so I got to pick on you. I love Bruins. Big
Batons.
Baton! So you guys are just talking about all the tools that we use. Go ahead, sir.
De-escalation.
De-escalation, hot topic right now, right? De-escalation, that's huge. I can tell you right now, I've been on this job for 24 years, and we've been de-escalating since the day I've been on this job, and they've been probably doing it a long time before that also, okay? That's just, we'll talk about that as we go too. Go ahead, sir.
Say, any violent confrontation?
Violent confrontations, okay? And you see those, where, on the news? You know, you see a lot of, I mean, I get emails all the time. There was just one in Houston the other day. I was on a freeway there. There was another one down in Houston the other day again where a sergeant got ambushed in a car. But yeah, violent stuff, good stuff, right? Yeah, go on. Go ahead.
I want to say pick up.
Say that again?
Pick up someone to come and provide support.
Oh, back up.
Oh, back up. Yeah, I'm sorry, back up, absolutely, right? And at any point in time, there are 20 routes here in the city of Worcester. I don't know if we've gone through that, right?
Yeah.
So we always have plenty of backup, all right? That's the good thing about working in a big city. You always have people close by. And I always say, we go to these classes a lot with a lot of the town officers where their backup is coming from miles away. And that must be kind of a weird thought in the back of your head, knowing that you might get an altercation or something like that, and your backup's a little bit away. I can remember the first time I had called for backup on this job. And I thought, my God, this could get ugly, right? But when I tell you, I thought that other officer was sitting in the bush right there. That's how fast they got there. That's how fast it is, and it makes you feel very, very good and very safe about yourself, knowing that your backup is that close. All right, but that's huge, absolutely, sir. What else are we thinking? What's that?
Last resort.
Last resort, okay, we'll talk about that. So these are all things that we think of, okay? A lot of things you named were all what we call as our duty belt, okay? Those are all of our tools. All right? And at each point in the use of force, we are allowed to use a different tool, okay? So the first thing I want to explain to you is what we teach here is force equals force, okay? Okay, you don't, to gain compliance, we just don't pull our gun out on someone without a gun, am I right or wrong? Right? Correct? Yeah? All right, it's almost like, what's the old saying? You don't bring a bat to a gunfight or a knife to a gunfight, right? It's force equals force, and that's what we used to talk, well, that's what we teach. It is a force continuum is what we'll talk about here, all right, as we get going. All right, any questions before we start? No? All right, good. All right, so use of force. Go ahead, you want to do this, man?
Yep, all right, so use of force used by police in less than actual 2% of all 60 million annual citizens interactions. For the most part, the majority of people, individuals that we talk to on the street or whatever, any circumstance or situation, most of those scenarios, most of those outcomes are compliance. Like it's for the most part. So very little of those are actual situations in which use of force is applicable. According to FBI, Leoka statistics, the number of police officers killed in injury has been increased over the recent years. 2019, 48 law enforcement officers were killed in the line of duty during felonious incidences, and more than 56,000 were assaulted while performing their duties.
All right, so some learning objectives we're going to go through tonight. We'll define some of the things: force, not deadly force, bodily harm, and serious bodily injury. Okay? We'll also identify some of the regulations and statutes of the U.S. Supreme Court, federal and Commonwealth cases that govern the use of force by police. And then we'll talk about some identifying specific underlying circumstances and factors that increase the risk of unlawful resistance by suspects against the police. Civil liability associated with violating a person's constitutional rights, that's always in the news, right? We see that a lot now. Identify and demonstrate how to apply the MBTC use of force model, that's completely different. We'll talk about the use of force model as we get going, okay? Identify core concepts, best practices, and principles of tactical de-escalation. Who had that de-escalation word? Huge, right? Huge, big power topic right there. Identify requirements for reporting instances where force was used, all right? That's a big one right now too, okay? Because when do you think, a lot of times, when do you think the law enforcement gets in trouble when it comes to use of force?
Not reporting.
Not reporting, not so much not reporting, but not reporting properly, okay? Perception and articulation, being able to put your thoughts into words and on paper is huge nowadays. The old days of, oh yeah, we got in a brief struggle and this happened. And then you look at some guy's picture and he's a mess. Those days are over, okay? You have to articulate, you have to base on your perception. And understand, everyone's perception is different, am I right or wrong?
Right.
We all have different perceptions, okay? I might look at him and think, oh my God, he could knock me out. Whereas someone else might look at him and say, yeah, bring it on, let's do it, right? It's just a perception of the time. Everyone's perception is different. All of our perception is different based on our past circumstances and experiences that we've gone through. So that plays a huge role when it comes to this stuff, huge role. All right. Good.
Yep, so use of force, and I want to kind of emphasize on this one here. To minimize unnecessary injury to both the police officer and offenders, officers must effectively stop unlawful resistance, and it notes here as quickly as possible, right? Because we also have a duty to not allow a situation to further escalate in that type of situation, right? It's obviously making sure that we're aware of any further injuries based off unnecessary force, and also protecting ourselves as well too, so we're not into a situation that we're putting ourselves and fellow other officers in harm's way. All right, so we have a duty, but keep in mind this, as quickly as possible, okay? Now, put yourself in a situation where you might be at a situation where force might have to, you have to establish that perception that he was talking about, all right? There's so many decisions that have to be made during that process, right? In a quick instance, right? So the more that we educate ourselves on this use of force model, and we educate our fellow officers, our departments, our new officers, the more we know this in and out, based on what the state gives us, the better decisions we're prone to make in the outcome. Yes?
I'm a bit troubled by the emphasis on effectively stopping it as quickly as possible, because sometimes indeed time is needed to allow for de-escalation. And if there's misunderstanding and the focus or emphasis on let's stop this now, that is indeed escalating it in some cases.
Sure. This isn't the worst case type of situation, right? Active shooter situation, those things like that. But for the most part, before we even get to this point, de-escalation is a must. And we have to, like he was talking about, it's something that we've done all this time, but we also have to document what our de-escalation tactics were. For example, the state has us include in our report what our de-escalation method was, what it was that we did to try to de-escalate that situation. Did I try to talk them down? Did I put a desk in between us to kind of create space? Or in this instance where it's saying as quickly as possible, was this a situation which de-escalation wasn't feasible at the time of the incident? And therefore, that's why it's expressing how they want things to kind of as quickly as possible in that very dire situation. But any uses of force, maybe he's agitated, I'm not going to stop his agitation right then and there unless it's unsafe to act. But I'm going to talk to him, hey, listen, man, tell me what's going on. I want to talk to you, right? We have to employ those de-escalation tactics prior to utilizing force, and we have to make sure we document those things.
Ma'am, you're 100% right. When it comes to de-escalation, what does de-escalation do? It gives us what? Time, which just allows us to get distance, okay? Then sometimes we need to take cover with that stuff, okay? But that's what it allows us to do. It buys us that time, okay? But as we get further on in the presentation, they're gonna talk about the totality of the circumstances. That means everything that's happening at the time, okay? If you're hyper-vigilant, you're constantly aware of your surroundings, am I right or wrong? All right? Then your perception goes into play. So sometimes there are those instances, de-escalation is there, but it's a little bit different, if you understand what I'm saying, based on the situation. And that's called the totality of the circumstances, everything that's happening at the time. And we'll talk about that. And any more questions, we can go. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, I don't know what percentage of the Worcester police are veterans. And I know from my own, I'm not a veteran, but I know from experiences of being in situations that are intense as you might find in war, that it has a level of, like you said, hyper awareness, hyper vigilant. I mean, your peripheral vision is like, it's incredible when you're in a situation like that. How much time is spent helping officers understand how to bring some of that emotion back down so that the decisions they're making aren't fueled by a trauma-like response?
So we do a lot of de-escalation training, especially in our academies, okay? We do it during in-service also, okay? And you got to understand, when an officer gets dispatched to a call, okay, we're only getting the information that they're getting from the caller that's giving the dispatch to us. So you're kind of talking about a heightened awareness, am I right or wrong? Right? Would you go into would I go to a medical call, at the same heightened awareness as I would where the guy with a gun? Mm-hmm. No, it's different. You see what I'm saying? Until we get there and actually break it all down, okay, not only in our head, but in our mind, what we can do and what we can't do, okay, with the de-escalation and figure out actually what's going on, that's when it all comes into play. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's that heightened awareness is what it comes down to.
And then just to touch upon that, we do a lot, countless scenario role-playing situations within our training division and in service like he's talking about. And not every situation is a situation where you're going to be utilizing force. It may appear as though that's the type of situation that you're walking into, but at the end, there's handshakes at the end of it all, you know what I mean? So it's like, we incorporate the communication aspect to try to bring individuals down. One of the things that we pride ourselves in this department as well too is that we have our CIT, Crisis Intervention Team, that deal with individuals with mental health or any type of trauma or any type of situations that they've been going through. So having them accessible during situations like that, maybe I'm not the best person to talk to the individual that's going through some type of situation, and I could employ somebody else to go and talk to them just to try to bring that situation down. Tactical wise, you know, I could create a million type of examples. If there's an individual who's barricaded in a room, you know, no one else is in danger, right? There's not necessarily a need to rush into that room to deal with the situation at hand, right? We can make the efforts to kind of take steps back, right? Control the scene, try to establish some type of line of communication, and then try to end that situation in the most peaceful manner where, again, the officers and the individuals involved, everybody's safe at the end of the day.
And also, besides training, it's experience. So the longer you're out there going to these calls, you're able to show up and you're able to handle them correctly and to de-escalate much quicker. Like Greg talked about heightened awareness. Every time we go into a house, there's gonna be heightened awareness because we don't know that house, but they do. They know if there's weapons in the house, they know exactly where they are. So we can go in and we're not up here, but we're aware. We're aware of our surroundings and we're looking around and we wanna see where the hallways are, if there's a bedroom, if there's anyone else in. But in order for us to bring down anything that needs to be de-escalated, if it's a domestic incident and we need to separate people, a lot of that comes with training, but also with experience.
Yeah. Just one quick thing to add to that as well too. You see this in front of the desk here in front of the classroom. These are tools, but just like someone said, de-escalation, that's also a tool as well too. For officers to be able to do their job successful, we have to understand empathy and sympathy, right? And be empathetic to a situation, right? Understand, maybe we're not in their shoes, but we can understand that they're going through something, right? And then that type of training and communication and understanding kind of helps everybody as well. Just one more point to add to that is that we deal with individuals sometimes on a frequent basis, right? So initially, if it's the first encounter with that individual, we want to hopefully get that first encounter good, so that if they go through another experience or trauma, we've already built some type of relationship with them where that trust is somewhat established, right? We don't want to go into every call red hot, you know, when we don't need to, because at the end of the day, I don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm going to be fighting every single call I go to. I really want to communicate with people, and that's what we all try to train on.
And I think Jensen just hit it on the head. I'm glad we get to this point right now, okay? Because he showed us all these tools on our belt, right? What police officers wear, all those cool Batman tools and Superman stuff, right? It's all cool stuff, right? But in actuality, you know what our number one tool is?
Your communication.
Our mouth. So we have an academy coming up, and I get to teach in the academy. And one of the big things that we teach right off the bat in the academy is effective communication. Because if you can't communicate with people, guess what, folks? You're not going to be that good of a police officer. You know, you have to be able to communicate with people, have feelings, understand where they're at and why they're at, okay, in order to get to that point, all right? Effective communication is huge. That is our number one tool. I'm telling you, some people don't want to believe it. If you could go your whole entire career not going hands-on, that's what I want. Do you think we want to go out and have to go hands-on with people and possibly get hurt or hurt somebody else? Absolutely not. I'd rather not use my voice, okay? Be an effective listener, effective communicator. That's what it's all about. That's your number one tool. And when we ingrain that in the recruits' heads right from the beginning, it helps a lot as they get out, as they go on.
It's your second most important tool. It's at the heart.
Yeah, like he said. Yep, 100%, 100%. Just being able to feel, you know, understand why they're there, and listen. Most people, when you go to these calls, you know, they just want to be heard. They just want to be heard.
Validated.
So just listen. Just be an effective listener and an effective communicator. That's all. That's what it comes down to. So definitions of force include the following, okay? Physical strength exerted upon an object or a person. exerting power to influence or control, imposing something or someone. All right? This was talked about. The CMR 6.03 defines force as the amount of physical effort, however slight, required by police to compel compliance by an unwilling individual. Another big word you're going to start hearing a lot of too is what? Compliance. Because ultimately, what are we looking for? Just compliance from a lawful order. That's all we're actually looking for, okay? And that's what it comes down to. Go ahead.
So force, IACP defines force as the amount of effort required by police to compel compliance from an unwilling subject. Force is any action with or without a weapon used by offenders to resist police to stop. For example, offenders use force to resist arrest and avoid apprehension. Use of force to stop offender force as quickly as possible to avoid unnecessary injury or death. And pretty much like we just discussed, not allowing that situation to create further. Physical escorting or handcuffing an individual with minimal or no resistance does not constitute use of force. And then later on, once we go through that use of force model, we'll talk about like what are reportable methods of force. If I just walk up to Greg and hey, listen, just take a walk with me real quick, right? That's not necessarily force because I'm just basically just guiding somebody. We'll get into that in a little bit.
All right, so force is a state law. Law enforcement officers shall not use force upon any other person unless de-escalation tactics have been attempted and failed and are not feasible based on the totality of the circumstances. I already said that once, right? Another big word, totality of the circumstances. So we're thinking about compliance, the totality of the circumstances, and force. Such force is necessary and proportionate to do what? Affect the lawful arrest, I said the lawful commands, lawful arrest or detention of a person. Prevent the escape from custody of a person, prevent imminent harm, and the amount of force used is proportional to the threat of imminent harm. Force equals force. Again, okay, just like that. While profiling the safety of the other officer or others. Defend against an individual who initiates force against an officer, okay? This is all the state law when it comes down to force. When it comes to circumstances, such force necessary and proportionate to, all right? Understand, again, like I said, we're looking for compliance, all right? That's all we're really looking for. If we can get that done by just communicating with someone, then that's what it comes down to, all right? Then we're gonna get into the different types of force and the different stages of when you can and can't use force. Ultimately, another big thing here, what did we say earlier? When did law enforcement, oh, go ahead.
I'm troubled by the idea that placing hands on somebody without their consent is not force. If a large officer came up to me and said, I need you to come with me, and put his hands on me, I would pull back. I mean, that to me is restraining me, and I could see that escalating. So I'm troubled by the idea that just placing hands on someone is not use of force.
So I'll break that down a little more. So one thing as police officers, we can't expect somebody to comply to us if we don't give them a lawful command. Same as if Officer Joinville was we're at a bar, his back is turned towards me, I walk up to him, hey, you're under arrest, right? His first reaction is going to be to pull away because he doesn't know what's going on, right? So the more information, the more communication I have with him, hey, listen, just take a walk with me. Whether that's de-escalation, maybe that person's not necessarily under arrest or under criminal crime. We just want to remove them from a situation just to kind of talk to them. That, in a sense, as far as what the state requires for force, is different from a hands-on approach where you're doing something to get them to comply. For an example, could be a wrist lock or some type of joint manipulation is different. But if I'm simply just walking up to Greg and say, hey, I want you to talk to me real quick, right? There's a difference between this and this, right? So that might be a little more higher form of use of force, and I promise you that'll make a lot more sense once we get to those use of force model.
All right, so medical response. Anytime we use the use of force here, okay, obviously we call an ambulance for a medical response. Officers shall always provide appropriate medical response to individuals who are exhibiting signs of complaining, injury, or illness following any use of force. Anytime an officer uses any type of use of force, we always offer medical attention. It's just part of the policy and procedure, okay? Understand that. Good to go?
Yep, so prohibited uses of force, except for temporary gain, regain, or maintain control, somewhat what we're talking about. Individual and apply restraints. An officer shall not intentionally sit, kneel, or stand on an individual's chest, neck, or spine, and shall not force an individual to lie on their stomach. Any individual placed on their stomach during restraint should be moved into a recovery position. or seated position as soon as possible, right? Now, the big shalls are shall not. This is what we shouldn't be doing, and you see also intentionally.
Want to continue on that?
Sure. Okay, so as far as chokeholds, I'll be the first to tell you that as far as what the state curriculum was, we've never had in the history, at least since I've been on, any form that we teach of a chokehold whatsoever, okay? And basically this is what the state spells out. A law enforcement officer should not use a chokehold or other tactics that restrict or obstruct an individual's breathing or oxygen flow to an individual's head or neck. An officer shall not obstruct the airway or limit breathing of any individual. An officer shall not restrict oxygen or blood flow to an individual's head or neck. Chokeholds, their definition means the use of a lateral vascular neck restraint, carotid restraint, or other action that involves the placement of any part of law enforcement officer's body on or around the person's neck in a manner that limits the person's breathing or blood flow with the intent of or with the result of causing bodily injury, unconsciousness, or death. So that's out of play.
We understand that. There are no chokeholds, okay? We never taught chokeholds. We don't teach chokeholds. We don't even authorize them.
Where does probable cause fit into the use of force?
Probable cause is based on the circumstances. So the definition of probable cause is the moment of the arrest within the facts of the knowledge of the officer or within the collective knowledge of the police, and of which the officer has reasonable, trustworthy information was sufficient to warrant a person of reasonable caution or prudence to believe the person being arrested has committed or is committing a crime for which the arrest is being made. That's ingrained in my memory from the yeah.
From the
That-
academy.
have to,
It's like, oh,
right?
you have to
Yeah.
memorize that.
That's ingrained in my mind for the academy. That's how important that is. Okay? So basically, the totality of all the circumstances of what we believe when a person is committing a crime. Now, understand that use of force isn't always applicable during an arrest, right? To some degree, right? So, for example, if I'm dealing with an individual who's going through crisis, right? And I have to employ maybe a joint manipulation to get that person to a place where they need help medical. I might not be arresting that individual, but I need to do something in order to stop them from hurting themselves or hurting anybody else as well too.
I guess maybe I didn't make it clear. What I was trying to find out, let's use your example where you walked up behind him and you said, let's go for a walk for a few minutes. And you put your hands over here and your hands over here.
Yep.
And did you have to, in your mind, do you have the formula of probable cause before you touched him?
Not necessarily at that time, if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so no, not necessarily at that time. What if I just want to talk to you to see what actually is going on, right? So I give you a lawful command, hey, can you come with me so we can just talk outside for a minute, right? I can kind of escort you out, correct?
You can if you have a lawful reason for probable cause.
So there's a reason why I want to talk to you, though. Am I right or wrong? It wasn't because I wanted to pick you out of a crowd. Someone called and made a statement saying, hey, he did this, or we need to do that, or you need to talk to him about this.
Okay, well, that's the part that was.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. That was the part I was missing.
Yeah.
So you had, in that case, you had probable cause to, you felt as though you had enough probable cause to walk up, touch him, and continue from there.
Well, you might be getting that reasonable suspicion.
Yeah, it's more.
It's, you know, you can start getting the criminal law a little bit. Did you have criminal law last week? Reasonable suspicion, probable cause, yeah. We started to get into that, right?
Can I put it to a different, maybe different term from probable cause? Let's talk about an officer's duty to verify or dispel something. And maybe that could also play along with de-escalation. You know, maybe this person's not wanted for something, but I want to talk to them to establish a relationship. Or maybe a victim is afraid to be in the presence of somebody else, and I go up to the victim and, hey, just come walk with me real quick, right? There could be so many different types of situations that plays a role too. But the justification for us to be doing that is right, the attempt. They could say no, and if I don't have a crime, I can't force them to, hey, come outside. But I'm trying to do the things for the best interest of everybody in that situation.
I understand.
Do we clarify that?
I do.
Okay, all right, excellent. All right, discharging a firearm into a motor vehicle. We cannot do that, okay? We cannot discharge a firearm into a moving motor vehicle unless based on the totality of the circumstances, including the risk of the safety of the persons in the area such discharge is objectively reasonably, okay? That's a big word. You're going to be hearing a lot about that pretty soon, okay? Necessary to prevent imminent harm to a person and the discharge is proportionate to the threat of imminent harm, and only if the following conditions exist. Would you agree with me that a motor vehicle is a deadly weapon?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so now can you see when we might be able to discharge a firearm into a moving motor vehicle? We cannot unless, what it's gonna say here, okay? A person in the vehicle is threatening the officer or another person with deadly force by means other than the vehicle, or the vehicle is operated in a manner deliberately intended to strike an officer, okay? Another person. Understand that? We cannot discharge unless it's used as a deadly weapon, okay? Good. A person in the vehicle threatening the officer or another person, officers have not intentionally positioned themselves in such a way to create a likelihood of being struck, okay? Obviously, we can't box a car into a certain area and not allowing them to get out and put our body in the way of that motor vehicle, okay? And then turn around and say, hey, well, he came right at me. Well, you created that situation. We understand that? All right? It's a byproduct of what you've done. So you can't do stuff like that.
This is in Texas.
What's that?
This is in Texas.
No, it's far from Texas, all right? Far from Texas, all right? The officer is not firing strictly to disable a vehicle, and the circumstances provide a high probability of stopping or striking the intended target. I get a lot of these questions in the license to carry classes when it comes to firearms and stuff like that. Well, what about trying to shoot to disable the motor vehicle? What do you think of that?
Are you really gonna be able to
No.
do that with a pistol?
No, you can't, okay? No, you're not looking to disable. I'm not shooting the tires out or trying to shoot the engine. It's not gonna happen. Go ahead.
But this just happened a month or two ago at McDonald's at Tatnick Square, where a private security guard, who was a former, shot into the vehicle because the guy had bashed into his patrol car, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and he was arrested. And he was charged.
Yes,
He was arrested and charged, correct. Yeah, he was.
but is that this situation that you're talking about?
So, let's think about this. Did he box the car? Was that car easily available to leave?
Well,
Readily available to leave?
something had happened like 15 to 20 minutes prior to in the CVS parking lot, where the guy was doing donuts in a souped-up pickup truck and almost hit someone walking through.
So I'm gonna go back on my words. Totality of the circumstances. What were the circumstances that led up to the incident? You just told me what they were. He was doing donuts, right? So would that lead me to wanna box that car into a parking spot and not let him leave?
Well, that's what he did,
I agree.
according to what I read.
I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking, but yes, you're absolutely right. You're right. This is like that, but understand, this is because he's not a police, he's a security officer. He's not a police officer.
But even in that
At
situation.
that time, yes, but he had a lot of experience.
Yes, he probably did. I can't tell you what his thinking was, what his perception was at the time. I can only tell you based on this, it's not something we do. It's not something we do at all. All right? He technically, if you really want to look at it, he had to be in fear of serious bodily injury and or death to discharge his firearm. Serious bodily injury and or death. That's what he had to be in fear of. And he did do that, so now he's going to have to explain that. You see what I'm saying? Go ahead.
Is this Worcester PD policy or is this state law?
It's state law. State law. State law. I can't, to be honest with you, maybe once or twice years ago, I can't recall anyone ever discharging a firearm in a motor vehicle. Not in the city. Okay? Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have one. So shooting out tires, right? Okay. All right, I'm just kind of, all right, armed robbery.
Yeah.
You guys get there right as they're driving away. Why wouldn't you shoot out their tires to stop them?
Because you put in the public at risk.
So what happens if we miss the tire and hit a civilian?
Yeah,
But
that's.
just, it's,
So you just keep chasing them until they crash?
it's not the Wild West.
Essentially.
No, we don't, that's not even the case now anyways either. We don't, car chases are very few and far between here. All right, they really are. Because what do you see on the news during a car chase? What's the ending of a car chase when they show you on the news? Civilians get hurt,
Yeah.
people going really fast. Yeah, the liability is huge.
You gotta weigh in the factors of like the potential risk that it's doing to the public. Is by your actions, by trying to apprehend this individual, gonna cause a greater incident than if you were to let that person go, get their plate, get their information, get all the CSU stuff, and then a day or maybe a couple hours later knock on his door, put that or her in handcuffs, right? How severe is that? Now, big what ifs, right? If that person is driving their car full speed into a crowd of people and those individuals are at risk, I'm not gonna say that I'm gonna do that, but that could change the situation where that individual may need to be stopped at some point, whatever decision and perception the officer is experiencing at that time. So like, you gotta weigh the pros and cons, We don't want to do anything from our actions just to put the public at risk.
What about spikes? Do you really use
Stop sticks?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have stop sticks, we do have, we did have them, the sergeants used to have the stop sticks, and those are very effective. But understand that, I mean, they have to drive over them, correct?
Yeah.
Most of the time when they see the guy going in there and put him down there, they're not gonna say, well, let's go with the stop stick, they're probably gonna drive right around, right? So yeah, they're very effective, I agree with them, I've seen them work. but,
State police,
You know, state police use them. stop
State
signs.
police use them a lot.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Going back to McDonald's, and I know that's ongoing, is there not a huge difference between, we're talking about officers here, we're not talking about former officers who's now a civilian unloading his, I would imagine any civilian who's gonna unload in that type of scenario has got an awful lot of explaining to do, and in this case, ultimately resulted in an arrest. That's going to be a very difficult situation for this person, even if it was, quote, even if it was a, quote, a good shoot. He's probably, he hurting.
Yeah, so listen, you're right, and I'm not gonna Monday morning quarterback anything he did, because I was not there.
Right.
Did not read the report, I only just saw what you saw in the paper and read about it, okay, or heard what I heard from
Yeah,
other officers,
and
right?
it-
But what I can tell you is that through the license to carry class, when you just, if you people, did anyone have their license to carry? Yeah, so you guys have a gun, correct? And what were you told? If you discharge your firearm, you have to what? Be in fear of what? Serious bodily injury and or death, okay? That is when you can. Preservation of property, I can't take my gun out to save my jewelry, or you understand what I'm saying? Fear of serious bodily injury and or death. You are a loved one, okay? That's what it comes down to. But it's kind of the same exact thing. We're just not taking the gun out and saying, hey, back off. It's just not the way it goes. That's not reality of it. All right? What happened there? I don't know. I don't know what his perception was, what he was feeling at the time he did what he did. Do you understand what I'm saying?
But ultimately, whether, and again, because I don't know either, and I don't want to cast any, that's not, I guess my thought process here is that no matter what the actual is going to be determined, he's got a lot of answering to do, right, wrong, or indifference, and that's not going to be a pleasant experience over for whatever period that is.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. I would agree with you 100% with that. Any other questions up to this point? Go ahead.
This scenario, though, would have been a perfect case to de-escalate that whole thing, right? I mean, he's an experienced fellow. He's in his 60s, as I remember, and he's dealing with the punk kid with a souped-up Dodge pickup. Wouldn't you think it would have been better to somehow de-escalate the thing instead of chasing him around the corner and into another parking lot?
So
am I on the right track or no?
Yes, I agree with you, okay? But again, I don't know what happened prior to that, what his interaction was with this gentleman. Has he dealt with him in the past? Okay, does he know him personally to the point where he knows he does this, that, and another thing? It's the totality of the circumstances, everything surrounding it. We can just sit here and say, oh, I would have never did that, but you don't know what happened beforehand. It's the same thing and I like this, like in all my classes, I used to say the police-related shootings, not just the police-related shootings, right? What do they show you in a thing? They shoot an officer shooting at another individual, okay? They don't tell you the 10 minutes prior to that, what happened up to that, or even what happens after that. They just show you what they want to show you. And it's kind of the same thing there. I've never talked to this gentleman, so I don't know what happened prior to that. What led up to this instance? The totality of the circumstances. What led up to him doing that? I don't know what was his mind thought. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a whole bunch more that goes into it than just what you're seeing. All right? It's a lot more. What you're reading or what you're seeing, there's more to it. I mean, you don't really think that that's just the way it goes. No, it's not the truth.
Yeah, I think,
There's more to it. There's always more to it. And I don't know. I can't. Like I said, I don't know what he was thinking at the time.
a lot of that too is going to be, what the questions that are going to be asked, the questions that are going to be asked are what could have been done, like you're asking, what could have been done differently? Was there urgency for that individual to do that? Could that person just have backed off and allowed that person to go call the police? Like this they're going to weigh what the other options, what the more reasonable options are, right? And again, we're always going to be accountable for what we do. And we have to keep that in our mind when we make these decisions, right? We have to train, the more we train, the better decisions we make. We try to put that on. Are there going to be times where bad decisions are made? Absolutely. But we try to minimize those as much as possible.
Discharging firearms in the motor vehicles. Any more questions when it comes to that? You understand we cannot do that as a police officer. All right? We do not discharge firearms. All right? No shooting of tires. Yep. All right? None of that stuff. No shooting of ignitions. All right? And some of you guys who do shoot know it's pretty difficult to shoot moving targets as it is, right? So imagine shooting the car. Now, I guess it's a big thing, but it's just insane. All right, so that's a no-no. So, mass demonstrations, okay? It's another big thing. A law enforcement officer shall not discharge or order discharge of tear gas or any other chemical weapon, discharge or order the discharge of a kinetic impact device or rubber pellets from a propulsion device, or release or order the release of a dog to control or influence a person's behavior unless. Nate, can I just ask you to just, like, when it comes to this stuff with the SWAT team, when we can and cannot do that stuff?
Sorry.
I didn't want to just jump on you like that, but you know more about that than we do.
So the chemical weapons, we don't use, we're using just spray, so OC, we don't tear, we don't tear gas.
Pepper ball gun and stuff like that.
Spraying with our spray or spraying with a canister, it's the same spray. We don't do tear gas.
Good. A lot of this stuff up there, the SWAT team carries that stuff, all right? So that's just not like every officer's card is waiting to use, okay? So understand that. De-escalation tactics have been attempted and failed and are not feasible based on the totality of circumstances, and the measures used are necessary to prevent imminent harm, and the foreseeable harm inflicted by the tear gas or other chemical weapon, rubber bullets, or dog is proportionate to the threat of imminent harm. As you've seen in the paper the past 4 or 5 years, the protests have been pretty good. They're never an issue, okay? Honestly, they're there for a reason and we're there for your safety. That's what it comes down to, okay? We're there for your safety just as much. Go ahead.
Is this law post-2020, or has this been in effect longer than that?
This could be post. This could be post, okay? After all that stuff happened beforehand, that's what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure on that, so don't hold me to that, but I'm gonna say yes. So I've been teaching this for a while. There are a lot of slides that have been introduced into this use of force slideshow, okay, that were not there before, okay? And you'll see, there's a couple more too. Not just the de-escalation, some of that stuff too, but there's another one.
Yeah, so also too, to add to that, this has, in one way, like a lot of laws, has been something that's been in the curriculum, but a lot of things get adjusted over time, like variations of things or improvements. So like the state, when we've had similar mass demonstration types of formalities and laws and what we can and can't do, and then post, introduced a lot of different elements to improve upon some of the older practices.
That,
When you're talking about mass demonstrations in the context of the larger crowd and deploying any kind of these things, is it restricted to an officer of a certain rank to make that decision, or can any?
oh yeah, 100%. There's not a basic route officer or a patrol officer making that decision. That comes from the higher ups.
Okay. So
Yeah.
how high up, like a captain or deputy chief?
Yeah, yep, 100%. Basically whoever has come into the scene, all right, whoever's the head officer there at the time, lieutenant, captain, whoever decided, whoever it could be, they'll make the decision at that time.
Yeah, and also too, just one thing that maybe might not be fully known is that with our rank and some of our officials, as we call, whenever there's information for a planned protest or some type of demonstration to that degree, the effort is made to reach out to the coordinators prior to that, prior to that happening, just to establish communication so that we, number one, communicate with them, talk to us, allow that interaction to occur so that we, it's almost a form of de-escalation in a sense. And just to kind of know, hey, listen, is there anything you need from us? What would we need from you? In that sense, I'm not just kind of throwing little examples out there, but prior to, it's not like we deal with the situations after they've already occurred. We try to establish some type of ground prior to events like that.
Go ahead.
I know you went to second guess, but for instance, when they block a street, people can't get home and everything. How come you don't just get taken in? I don't understand that.
You mean just like?
It's against the law to block a street. I went outside and blocked the street.
It is,
That's not legal.
but do we want to de-escalate the situation or do we want to escalate the situation?
I want to get home.
We understand that also, right? I understand that also too, right? But just going into that situation on fire is going to make it worse. You're throwing gasoline on the fire, right? We just de-escalate it. We talk is what we do. We communicate and see what the issue is. And hey, listen, these people live in this neighborhood. Is there any way we can get them by there? Before, we start, it's in steps, okay? It's the same thing as in the use of force. Technically, you don't go from the bottom all the way to the top just like that. It could happen, and we'll show you how, but you know what I'm saying?
I do, but to be honest, I know I'm old, but I just feel like You put a radio abiding guys on your rights. If you wanna block the street, you can. You know what I mean? And that's where I'm coming from.
They block highways, right? In states. I know. I never see them block a highway like in the Midwest somewhere. It's always California, Florida, Massachusetts, somewhere. Yeah,
It's a delicate situation
weird.
for everybody, for everybody, and I like to use analogies. You're at home and you hear beep, 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 right? It's the fire alarm asking you for a battery, right? And we all know we all have those sometimes, the offenders, right? I could take that fire alarm down, put it away, and I stop that problem, right? But if my house sets on fire, then that's a bigger situation that I don't want to occur. So I'm gonna give that fire detector what it needs, a battery, right? So we all work together, we're on the same page. So I try to, I don't know if that makes sense, sorry. I just kind of come up with those. Yes, that's- I understand that, right? It's a very delicate situation, it's frustrating for everybody. Ultimately, just like with any type of situation, we want to bring that down to the most peaceful outcome for everybody.
And hopefully you don't live on a one-way street, do you?
No.
Oh, so just come in the other side, right?
I mean, like, you can-
It's just like, All right, so, non-deadly force, okay? Less lethal, we call it non-deadly force, is any use of force other than which is considered deadly force that involves physical effort to control, restrain, or overcome the resistance of another, all right? An officer, again, attempting to validate an arrest has the right to use force which is necessary to overcome physical resistance by the person sought to be arrested, all right? Again, force equals force, okay? Only the amount of force to effect the arrest. Only amount of force used to gain compliancy. That's what it comes down to, okay? The officer believes force is needed immediately to make a lawful arrest, and the officer makes known the purpose of the arrest, or believes that it's otherwise known by the suspect or cannot reasonably be made, or when known to the suspect, and when the arrest is made under a warrant, the warrant is valid and believed to be valid by the officer. What do you think the number one question is when we train our officers, right? We say, hey, listen, make an arrest on this individual here. So he goes to the individual and says, hey, turn around, put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest. What do you think the first thing he says is? Why? So we tell our officers, hey, listen, explain that to them. Explain why. Just tell them why. Don't say, oh, I'll tell you in 10 minutes or when you get to the station. No. What's that going to do? It's only going to escalate things, right? We want to de-escalate. He asks why. Give a lawful order. So the lawful order is please turn around, place your hands behind your back, you're under arrest. There's your lawful order. But you're not telling them why. Right? So we always say that, hey, listen, you gotta let them know, understand why they're placed under arrest. Okay? That's what it comes down to.
Communication is so important, and like Officer Joinville says, the very first day that a new recruit comes into this police academy, sitting in these very seats that you're sitting here right now today, we have them come up in front of the classroom, we have them talk about themselves, we have them address the class, we have them get in front of people and speak. And that training doesn't just start that one day, it ends. It continues throughout the next 32 years of their career when they're coming in service. Scenarios. Some people are better at it than others, but it is something that you learn with experience, And one other thing to add to with reasonableness, right? Just because we have force with force, okay, it also has to include reasonableness. I'm sorry, English is actually my second language, so sometimes I still trip up over my words. Nonetheless, let me paint a little quick scenario for you. And I've never encountered this, and I don't think any 95-year-old lady ever shoplifted, okay? But nonetheless, if I, for some unfortunate reason, have to arrest someone who is smaller stature, incapacitated, weak, and that person swings at me, right? Just because I can do something doesn't mean I should do something, okay? Right? You're talking force on force, but I don't necessarily have to react to that in that sense. If I understand that that situation may not, what else can I do? Okay, let me try to bring that situation down. Okay, so we have to also have empathy, sympathy, and understand what a situation is, think about it, and make the best decision as well.
So the last case, now we're talking about deadly force, okay? An officer may not use deadly force against a person who possesses only a danger to themselves, okay? We understand that, correct? All right, good. Where feasible, based on the totality of the circumstances, officers shall verbally identify themselves as police officers and issue some warning before using deadly force, okay? When we teach defensive tactics in our academy classes or into our officers, right? Do we just go and we smack somebody? No, we give them lawful commands, right? Hey, get back, right? think about that. What would that look like if our officers didn't say anything? In a deadly force situation, they just drew their gun and shot at somebody. It's like, that's not what it's meant to be, right? Am I right or wrong? Well, how does that look in public? Not good, right? Those lawful commands are huge, okay? And I can tell you that because sometimes some things that have happened. When some of our officers get in a use of force situation, even sometimes with deadly force, okay? Obviously, investigation has to take place, correct? When they go investigate and talk to witnesses of the situation, some of the witnesses say, hey, that officer told them to put it down 1,000 times. And why do you think that is? How do you think they heard that? Because the officer gave loud verbal commands. That's why, okay? Not only do we have body cameras now, but you have to use your mouth to give commands. That's what it's all about. You're gaining compliance, but you have to be telling them what to do. Do we understand that for the most part? Yeah? Are there any questions when it comes to that stuff? Go ahead.
Does this apply in situations with this a active shooter?
So that's completely, that's like a what if situation. That's completely different.
Okay.
When it comes to active shooter. All right. So deadly force again under Commonwealth versus Klein. This is huge, okay? This is a big one for the Commonwealth back in the 1970s. Police may use deadly force when requirements for deadly force are met. The arrest is for a felony. The officer believes deadly force, if used, okay, will not create substantial risk of injury to innocent persons. The crime involves conduct including the use of threatened use of deadly force, or there is substantial risk that the person to be arrested will cause death or serious bodily injury if his or her apprehension is delayed. And I can tell you this Commonwealth versus Klein because I tell this in all my cases, okay? Big case when it comes to use of force in the state of Massachusetts, all right? Klein was a dentist in Springfield. He lived in Springfield across the street from a pharmacy. On this night, he had heard the glass break outside his house. He goes outside, he sees two individuals trying to break into the pharmacy across the street from his house. He says, whoa, I have a license to carry and I have a gun. Goes back into his house, grabs a gun and license to carry, okay? Sees the two individuals trying to smash the windows to get into the pharmacy. Doesn't do anything. They calls the police. They finally get into the pharmacy, he comes out, he lets some rounds fly, okay, towards them, all right? They end up coming back out, they go back to the railroad tracks, there's railroad tracks behind the pharmacy there, the officers apprehend them in the back there, okay? They charged Klein with a whole bunch of stuff, okay, discharging a firearm, okay, assault with a dangerous weapon, all kinds of stuff. And he came around and said, He says, hold on a second. He says, they were trying to break into that pharmacy and steal stuff. And who knows who they were going to injure afterwards, okay? But what ended up coming out of this was the use of deadly force in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Okay, serious bodily injury and or death. Preservation of property. You know what they were trying to steal? Cigarettes and money. Okay, was anyone in danger at that point in time? No. And that's what came out of this. Serious bodily injury and or death to you or your loved one. That's what it comes out of this, okay? Understand that. This is a huge case in the Commonwealth. We talk about this all the time.
There's a few definitions when it comes to harm in general. So bodily harm. Injury does not pose or create a substantial risk of death or permanent disfigurement or significant loss of impairment. Now, when it comes to serious bodily injury that results in permanent disfigurement, protracted loss or impairments of a bodily function, limb, or organ, or substantial risk of death. In short, you're gonna get a bruise, it's probably gonna heal. Okay. This is something that's gonna affect the way you live for the rest of your life. Whether it's you lose a finger or an eye, something to that degree. So that's the differentiation between bodily harm and serious bodily injury.
Graham versus Connor, huge case, okay? I'm going to play the video. Where is it? Right here, Jen?
Yes, if you just hover on.
How will I be judged if someone sues me for using excessive force? That's a fair question for a student at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers. Hi, my name is Tim Miller. I'm an instructor at the Legal Division for the Center at Glencoe, Georgia. The leading case on use of force is the 1989 Supreme Court decision in Graham versus Connor. The court stated that all claims that law enforcement officers have used excessive force, deadly or not, in the course of an arrest, investigatory stop, or other seizure of a free citizen should be analyzed under the Fourth Amendment and its objective reasonableness standard. So what happened? Mr. Graham was actually a good guy. Unfortunately, he was also a diabetic. And feeling the onset of an insulin reaction one day, he called his friend Barry and asked for a ride to a convenience store. He hoped to buy some orange juice and thought that the sugar in the juice would counteract the reaction. After the two men arrived at the store, Graham got out of the car and hastily went inside. But the checkout line was too long. Mr. Graham turned around and hastily returned to the car. In his diabetic state, he probably didn't think to ask to jump to the head of the line. Back inside the car, he told Barry to drive to another friend's house. Maybe the friend would have some juice. Waiting and watching outside the store was Officer Connor. Officer Connor had watched Mr. Graham hastily enter and then leave the store. Connor suspected something was amiss. He followed the two men for a block or so and then activated his overhead lights, signaling for them to stop. Beside the road, Barry tried to explain that Graham was just having a sugar reaction, but Connor was not convinced. Connor told the two men to wait at the car. He then directed another officer to return to the store to determine what happened. Well, things got worse from that point. Graham got out of the car. He ran around the car 2 times, sat on the curb, and momentarily passed out. Backup officers arrived. Mr. Graham was handcuffed, thrown into the back seat of a police car. All this time, Barry and Graham, after he regained consciousness, tried to explain that his friend was just having an insulin reaction, but their pleas had no effect. Then Connor received the report from the officer who returned to the store. Nothing was amiss, and Mr. Graham sued the officers. So how should Officer Connor and these other officers be judged? On the one hand, Mr. Graham was an innocent man. On the other, the officer did not know that at the time. The Supreme Court stated that Connor and the other officers should be judged under the Fourth Amendment's objective reasonableness test. That test could be boiled down to 3 questions. First, what did the officer do, or what was the force he used? Second, what were the facts confronting the officer at the time he used force? And second, could a reasonable officer believe that what the officer did fell within the range of reasonableness after applying the facts to the Graham and other factors for using force? Note that the perspective that counts is the reasonable officers, which is obviously the court looking at the facts through the lens of this hypothetical officer. The point being, the subjective beliefs of the actual officer, whether good or bad, are not relevant. Officer Connor may have honestly believed that Mr. Graham was a shoplifter. However, the court's objective test asks what a reasonable officer could believe. Reasonable force is from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene. This reasonable officer considers the totality of the facts and circumstances confronting the officer at the time. The only caveat on what can be considered is the no 20/20 hindsight rule, something that was not reasonably known when the officers stopped Mr. Graham and placed in handcuffs was the report from the officer who returned to the store. Nothing was amiss, but to consider that report would be judging Connor and the other officers by hindsight. The no 20/20 hindsight rule, well, it probably worked to Officer Connor's favor in this case. But what if Officer Connor had learned while writing a use of force report that a suspect had a violent criminal history? Whether force is reasonable or not depends on the facts confronting the officer at the time. So, could a reasonable officer believe that stopping Mr. Graham, handcuffing him, and forcing him into the back of a police car was objectively reasonable? The Supreme Court stated that was the relevant question. What follows are some facts and circumstances that could help a court make that decision. They are for illustrative purposes, and not all of them are in the Graham decision. For example, Officer Connor might write in his use of force report, "I saw Mr. Graham run into the store. The door had barely closed to the convenience store before I saw him open it and run back out to Mr. Barry's car and get into the car. I heard the tire screech as the driver sped away at a high rate of speed." Well, would that be enough to stop the two men? The Supreme Court's decision in Terry v. Ohio states that an officer may conduct a temporary investigative detention based on reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. An officer's training and experience is also relevant in making that decision. Connor might add, "Based on what I saw and my department receiving several complaints of shoplifting from this store over the past several weeks, I activated my overhead lights and stopped the car." Connor would be admitting to effecting a Fourth Amendment seizure, but a seizure is reasonable when the officer can point to specific articulable facts that criminal activity is afoot. It should be obvious by now that the officer must help the court visualize what happened. Using good action verbs in a report, what you saw, said, or heard makes that visualization possible. Connor might write, "After Barry stopped, I walked to his car." Now, walked is a good action verb. The listener can visualize or see Connor walking. The report might continue. I told both men to stay in their car. I ordered another officer to go back to the convenience store and ask what happened. Next, I saw Mr. Graham get out of the car. Graham opened the passenger door. He ran around the car 2 times, sat down on the curb, and fell over as if he had passed out. Officers can make objective opinions. Now, objective opinions are supported by facts. Connor might add, "It was my opinion at the time that Mr. Graham was under the influence of alcohol. I make that opinion based upon my years of experience with intoxicated people. They are generally irrational. Graham was not rational. He ran around a car 2 times after I, a police officer, told him to wait inside. Traffic was on the road. Then he sat on the curb and fell over as if he had passed out." To further support his opinion of intoxication, Connor might add, "I saw that Graham's eyes were glassy. His speech was slurred. His breath smelled sweet, as if he had been drinking alcoholic beverages. Incidentally, a diabetic's breath may also smell sweet." Connor might explain why intoxication is so relevant. Someone who's not thinking rationally could have stepped out into the traffic and caused an accident, he might state. Moreover, people under the influence of alcohol or narcotics, they're less likely to obey an officer's commands and more likely to be assaultive. Facts paint the picture. Facts allow the court to picture what happened and then make an objective decision. But mere conclusions make someone ask how or why. An example of a mere opinion might be simply stating, Graham was non-compliant. How was he non-compliant? Cop talk creates the same confusion as mere conclusions. Consider, he made a furtive movement. How does someone make a furtive movement? And pre-assault indicator, what's a pre-assault indicator? Other words of caution might be, stay clear of this, stay clear of fuzzy words, like he indicated, suggested, or implied something. How? How did he suggest? How do we imply that? Reports should state what the officer saw, heard, and said. Good fact articulation is not easy. It also takes time. What's more, officers may experience tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, memory loss, but they should paint the picture with the sights and sounds that they remember. While it may be impossible to recall exactly what someone said, the officer may still remember, he screamed at me and clenched his fist like a boxer. The Supreme Court stated, the test for reasonableness under the Fourth Amendment is not capable of precise definition or mechanical application. In short, there are no perfect answers. The perfect answer in Graham's case might have been for Officer Connor to walk inside the convenience store and escort Mr. Graham to the head of the line. But that would require Connor to know all the facts. It would be judging him by hindsight. Allowance must also be made for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. Connor made a decision after Graham got out of the car. Obviously, there were other options. And while hindsight may prove one option better than another, what matters is whether the option chosen fell within the range of reasonableness based on the facts confronting the officer at the time. Reasonable force is a balancing test. The facts confronting the officer at the time are applied to the Graham and other factors for using force. The Graham factors are reasons for using force. They act like a checklist of possible justifications for using force. They are not exhaustive, and not all of them may apply in every particular case. The Graham factors are the severity of the crime, the immediacy of the threat, and whether the suspect was actively resisting or trying to evade an arrest or other lawful seizure by flight. The severity of the crime generally refers to the underlying reason for seizing someone in the first place. Officer Connor appeared to be acting under a reasonable suspicion that Graham stole something from the convenience store. While that suspicion proved incorrect, the question is whether it was reasonable at the time. Arrests and investigative detentions are traditional governmental reasons for seizing people. It could also be reasonable to seize someone who is not suspected of any wrongdoing. Reasonable force can be used to control the movements of a passenger during a traffic stop. It may be used to detain someone in or around a home while executing a warrant for contraband. The operative word for any type of seizure is reasonableness, which always depends on the facts. Let's skip immediacy of the threat for a moment and go to resistance and flight. Resisting a lawful seizure affects several governmental interests. It may prevent the officer from executing a warrant, or in Officer Connor's situation, prevent him from completing his investigation. Remember, too, that Connor told Graham to stay in the car, and that Graham arguably resisted that order by getting out. He ran around the car. He sat down on the curb. Traffic was on the road. He could have caused an accident or injured others. Now let's look at threat. The Graham factors cannot be considered in a vacuum. The nature of Graham's resistance could also support a threat to the safety of the officer or others. Threat is generally considered the most important governmental interest for using force. What's more, attempting to evade a lawful seizure by flight causes some of the same concerns as resistance and may also pose a serious threat. Two subsequent Supreme Court cases called Scott versus Harris and Plumhoff v. Reichert involve speeders. They fled when officers signaled them to pull over for traffic violations, and in doing so caused a significant threat to everyone on the road. The lower courts would go on to add other factors. For example, what was the known violent criminal history of the suspect? Another might be the suspect's size, height, weight, and condition compared to that of the officer. And the presence of innocent bystanders is also a factor to consider. But while the courts have listed other factors to consider, they are generally a subset of what is considered the most important Graham factor, immediacy of the threat. In Graham, the offense at issue was possible shoplifting, and the initial intrusion on Mr. Graham's liberty was only sitting in a car. As the encounter developed, however, the intrusion on his liberty became greater. But didn't the governmental interest for more force also become greater? Again, Officer Connor told the men to wait at the car. Graham resisted that order by getting out. Add that to his irrational behavior and the possibility he might get out on the road and cause an accident. Maybe I should ask you, could a reasonable officer believe that what the officers did, the force they used, fell within the range of reasonableness after applying the facts confronting them at the time to the Graham and other factors for using force? This has been FLETC Talks. I'm Tim Miller, and thank you for listening.
So Graham versus Connor, 490 U.S. 386, was a 1989 case, okay? Objective reasonableness, okay? Excessive force. This is where we get our use of force data from, okay? This is what allows us to use force, okay? Actions must be objectively reasonable. That is the big word when it comes to Graham versus Connor. Objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances confronting them without regard to their underlying intent or motivation. So the totality of the circumstances, everything that's going on in the time, okay, means your action, your force must be objectively reasonable to what's going on there, okay? So the test of reasonableness under the Fourth Amendment is not capable of a precise definition like we talked about before or mechanical application. It's proper application, careful attention to the facts of each particular case, including the severity of the crime at issue. If we talk about Graham versus Connor, what was the crime? Shoplifting, right? It was shoplifting.
Suspected.
Suspected shoplifting, correct, right? So, there we go. The severity of the crime was suspected shoplifting, okay? Whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the officer or others, or whether or not he is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. In actuality, when they pulled the car over, what was that gentleman doing? He got out of the car, what did he do? He started going around the vehicle, right?
No, before that, his friend said he's going into diabetic shock. He needs something.
He needs something. And the officers didn't listen, did they?
No.
So what did they do?
They created the situation. It's just like taking their cop car and
They
boxing somebody
violated his
in.
rights.
Yeah, so what they ended up doing, they handcuffed him, right? And they sent another officer back to
They
the scene.
escalated
And did they call an ambulance because the guy's having
Yeah.
a medical emergency? Sounds like they did.
Correct, but understand this was back in 1989, okay? Not that I don't agree with you, okay? But that's just what happened at the time, that's the case being presented here, all right? So the reasonableness of particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene rather than with 20/20 vision or hindsight, all right? The calculus of reasonableness must embody allowance for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation, all right? I talked about this earlier. Big words, totality of circumstances. That's what we use, okay? When determining whether a particular use of force is objectively reasonable, courts will consider the totality of the circumstances from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, and including, again, type and severity of the crime, the immediate threat of this individual, okay? And are they actively resisting arrest at this time? All right? That's what it all comes down to when it comes to totality of circumstances. Go ahead.
So is this an example that's used in the training today?
Yes.
Graham versus Connor? Go ahead.
Yeah, we,
This,
sometimes, and it's tough to say because sometimes mistakes or situations, unfortunate situations happen, right? Nothing in this world is perfect, right? And a lot of information, just like you said, had the question been asked or being able to learn what's going on in the situation by someone telling us maybe this person's in diabetic shock, right? We have to learn by some of the stuff that unfortunately happens, right? So we can better ourselves. You know?
so would the part of the training today, it's not 1989, be that in this situation, the fact that someone was having a medical emergency would mean that you take a little bit different path?
100%. What's it saying that? What do you think we're doing as an officer? Someone says, hey, my friend here is having a medical emergency, all right? Now, we've all been trained in first responder, CPR, all that stuff, okay? So we kind of know what a diabetic reaction is and stuff like that is, okay? Yes, does it look similar to someone who's intoxicated? Yep. So-so, right? So-so. It's kind of, it is what it is, but the first thing we're gonna do is do what? We're gonna call an EA. We're gonna get him checked out medically, because that's first and foremost, correct? Making sure this individual is okay. So, but in the meantime, while he's getting checked out medically, what can I do? Hey, do me a favor. We're gonna stay here with him, making sure he's all right. Just go back to the store and just verify the spell. What my hunch was is that he was struggling, right? And now, no, he wasn't. Okay, but now we're getting him the medical attention. We know he wasn't doing that, and he's gonna be on his way, right? All right, real fast, we're gonna take a break. Officer perception, I talked about this already, okay? Unique individual perception on the scene of the critical when deciding how much force to use. We all have different perceptions, correct? I already talked about that, how it's made up. Again, your perception is also based on the totality of the circumstances and continuing to assess a plan and act, being hypervigilant, okay? Objective reasonableness is a standard that we just talked about. It's not determined by any particular tactic or weapon used by the officer, but rather all the surrounding circumstances that cause the officer to make that decision, the totality of the circumstances. You see where it all comes into play now, for the most part? All right, perception includes but is not limited to the following, okay? Is the suspect capable of carrying out the action or threat? Is the suspect in a position to use his capabilities? Did the suspect show intent by an overt act, word, or deed? All right? What one officer may perceive as a threat, like I talked about before, another might not, all based on his past experiences. Time on the job, okay? What someone who has a year on the job would feel going into a call compared to someone who has 10 or 15 years on the job. Completely different, okay? I know they call them salty old vets, but they've been around for a while, and there's a reason for that, okay? Differences in individual officer perception and tactic, weapon choice do not automatically mean force used by one over another was unreasonable, okay? It's all based on the officer's perception, all right? And the big word I talk about all the time is perception and be able to articulate, putting that stuff into words on paper, okay?
I'm sorry, but I thought it was reasonably objective. I mean, there is a reasonability requirement. Just because someone had a different perception, if that perception wasn't reasonable.
From an objective standpoint.
Right.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. Yep. That's exactly what they said. Objective reasonableness. Yep. Hey, so real fast, the excessive force in Graham versus Connor, that was huge. We kind of got to that in that whole slide, 2 or 3 slides before this, okay? Other big thing when we start to get to the use of force and the use of force continuum is the totality triangle, all right? Obviously. It starts at the top, the perceived circumstances. What do we think is going on there, okay? What do we know? Then it continues down here to perceived subject actions. What do we think he's doing? What is he about to do? Or what has he done, okay? And then a reasonable officer's response to all of this stuff, all right? This is called the totality triangle. We preach this a lot when it comes to the use of force, all right? Real fast, civil liability, 42 U.S.C. 1983. Civil lawsuits can be filed against individual officers for violating a person's constitutional rights. We all know that, okay? Every officer on this job knows that. Any law enforcement officer who's good at what they do knows that, okay? They've been trained properly. Officers who violate a person's Fourth Amendment rights when using force risk being disciplined by his employee agencies and held personally responsible for a court-imposed damages award to the person whose rights were violated, okay? All falls under the civil rights, the civil liability statute. Officers can also be charged criminally for violating a person's constitutional rights. We understand that too. You've seen in the paper, it happens around the country once in a while, okay? Excessive force, okay? This is what it comes down to. Civil liability and excessive force. A suspect may not use force to resist arrest when the suspect knows or has reason to know that the person arresting them is a police officer engaged in the performance of their duties. Remember earlier, Officer Martinez said about that lawful order, okay? What about a plainclothes officer who's not showing his badge or anything like that, but has a gun, and he tries to effect an arrest, okay, without any lawful orders? What do you think about that? Right? We don't know, right? You just don't know. So that lawful order is huge, okay? The performance of their duties. Where the officer uses excessive or unnecessary force to subdue an arrestee, regardless of whether the arrest is lawful or unlawful, the arrestee may defend himself by employing such force as reasonably appears to be necessary, okay? So, the other big thing, someone asked about some of the slides. This was recently put in here, for, I think, 2020, I think that's what you said, yeah? Duty to intervene. An officer present and observing another officer using or attempting to use physical force, including deadly force beyond that which is necessary, objectively reasonable, again, based on the totality of the circumstances, there it is again, shall intervene to prevent the observed officer's use of unnecessary or unreasonable force, all right? An officer who observes another officer using unreasonable physical force shall report it to the appropriate supervisor as soon as reasonably possible, but not later than the end of their shift. The officer shall prepare a detailed written statement describing the incident consistent with uniform protocols. This statement will be included in the supervisor's report, okay? Duty to intervene is huge. All right, this is the meat and potatoes of it all, okay? This is the use of force model, all right? And we'll sort of talk about it step by step. And again, perceived subject's actions, threat perception category, and reasonable officer's response, okay? We're gonna get into this step by step, all right? So your threat perception, obviously, it's the middle portion of this wonderful model, okay? What's gonna end up happening here, all right, is what was known by the officer on the scene? What was the type and severity of the crime involved? Was the suspect an immediate threat to safety? Again, we talk about it over and over again, the totality of the circumstances. Everything you know about what's going on at the time, okay, is what's gonna play into effect here. Strategic, okay, is the very bottom of this. It's right down here, all right? And at the strategic level, the officer's baseline perception is in the occupationally accepted risk. The officer is aware of his surroundings and employs basic safety strategy, distant positioning. It's called strategic, okay? That's what that is, all right? Understanding that all it is basically speaking with someone else, communicating with them, okay, effectively, all right? Having conversation back and forth, all right? Being able to get a little distance and position ourselves in a safe manner, all right? It's strategic, all right? That is your threat perception there. Now we move up one level, okay? So from that strategic, right, threat perception, now we're gonna get into tactical threat perception, okay? It's a perceptual increase in risk assessment with safety strategies deployed. Underlying circumstances and other factors that indicate forthcoming interaction or enforcement action. Tactical. The way I like to explain this, right, and you guys probably already always hear this stuff. Officers go out with their families to dinner. Where do you think they sit? In the back, right? Because what are we always looking for? The door, right? How am I going to get out of here? That's kind of tactically. You're thinking it tactically in advance, okay? Understanding what you want to do in case something happens, all right? Forthcoming interaction or enforcement action. You're thinking tactically, all right? We understand that? Good. That's tactical threat perception. After you get from tactical threat perception, volatile. Love volatile here, because volatile sounds like what? Volcano. Think of a volcano. Where did the volcano just explode? Iceland?
Iceland.
Iceland, okay? The threat perception is recognized by the officer. The level of danger and potential for bodily harm is increasing with action by police ongoing or certain. Volcano, it could erupt at any time. That's volatile, okay? That's what we talk about. An instance I like to use, one of the instances for a volatile situation is a domestic violence incident, okay? I go to a house, male, female, domestic violence. Could that escalate really bad, really fast? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, it could be a volatile situation, all right? So, volatile, volcano, that's the way we think of that. Volatile threat perception, good right there. From there, we move to harmful, okay? We're moving up the ladder, up the threat assessment. An accelerated assessment of danger, bodily harm to the officers or others is ongoing or imminent. It's gonna happen, it is happening, okay? That is your threat perception. It's a harmful threat perception. And then last but not least, okay, lethal. This is the one we don't want to get to, okay? Lethal threat perception is perceived threat of imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or third party, I mean anyone else around there, okay? It's called the lethal threat perception, all right? From the threat perception, we're gonna move over to the perceived subject's actions, all right? This is what they do and what they don't do. Right, this one?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I just want to just point out here, like this, what does this whole thing look like to you?
A staircase.
A staircase, okay, right? Staircase. That does not necessarily mean that things start here, and go up here, and go up here, and go up here, and go up here, okay? Oftentimes when I go up the stairs, I'll maybe skip a stair or two or three, in that sense. You may walk in a situation and it could be actively resistant, right? Where, a volatile situation, using that category. And then by de-escalation, we could bring that person down here. Or we might walk into a situation where someone's compliant and then it turns into an assaultive type of situation. And then you see here, the colors are blending, right? A lot of this has to do with perception, just like we talked about earlier. So, to simpler terms, compliant person, okay? Someone who, if given a lawful command, right, if it's reasonably given in that type of situation, person is compliant. Person is, cooperating, okay, in a sense. So we'll talk about the reasonable officer responses in that sense. Now, moving on up, all right? Everything's good. This is where we want everything to be. In actuality, this is where most of our encounters are. And I say encounter. Encounters are like a strong word. I like to say interaction. Interaction, this is basically the most part. Resistant, passive. Now, there's two resistance, all right? The difference between passive and active. Passive resistant is maybe someone who's not at the point where they're being compliant, but you want them to do something and they don't want to do it. They're not using any physical strength. They're not pulling away from you. They're not assaulting you or anything like that. Maybe you need to move that person, like we talked about, to a different location, right? And then part of that stuff, we'll talk about the officer's responses to that, breaking down that type of person. Actively resistant, that's any individual maybe who is being placed under arrest, or even someone with mental health issues that you're trying to help to control. That's using any mechanical or physical means, right? They're not yet at the point, or not even at the point where they're being assaulted, right? They may be pulling away from you. They may be using tensing up, right? And that's another point I want to come across, is that we have body cameras. Body cameras we've been using for a little over a year now. I like the body cameras. I'm all for it. One thing that keep in mind is the cameras and videos don't capture anything. If I go up to Officer Joinville and I need to remove him from a situation and stuff like that, right, and he tenses up, and I feel that tension, right, and he becomes actively resistant, where I feel that, right, maybe nervousness and maybe whatever it is, we try to de-escalate that situation prior to that becoming that, but the camera's not going to get that feeling, okay, so that's why there is still reports and justification for things like that. But someone, for example, who grabs a steering wheel, doesn't let go, right, trying to put them in custody, they're not doing that. Someone who grabs a table, and even someone who runs away from you, right? They're using physical effort to kind of escape in that sense. Assaulted bodily harm, we talked about the difference between bodily harm and serious bodily harm. Bodily harm, remember, it's not something that's permanent disfigurement. It can potentially get to that point, okay? But someone who is being assaulted, they're striking you, they're assaulting somebody else, and we have to act to protect that person from that continuous assault. And then we have the assaultive, serious bodily harm or death, and that's the unfortunate circumstance where maybe somebody could be lethal towards us, assaultive, serious towards us, a family member, a crowd, general public, so on and so forth. But again, the biggest thing that I want to preface is that this isn't necessarily one step. This isn't IKEA, right? We're not building furniture here. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can walk into some type of different situation all the time.
And do we understand that this is what they call color blending, okay? We understand that a compliant person can very much quickly skip all these steps and become assaultive, correct? Mm-hmm. All right, so it's not like step by step by step, okay? It can go from here. The same way, someone who is assaultive or may have a deadly weapon could soon become compliant, correct? Mm-hmm. The weapon's dropped, pushed to the side, and now he's becoming compliant. You see what I'm saying? So you don't have to go up every step and down every step. It's called color blending, all right? Good to go? Yep, all right, good. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we expected, we just explained that compliance. So a suspect is fully cooperative and does not resist. Obviously they're working with you. We're all working together to get whatever end goal done. And then just like I talked about, resistant, passive. Suspect is uncooperative, but does not make any overt physical action or body movement while resistant. Okay. Resistant active. Suspect resistance becomes more active in the scope of intensity, right? That volatile situation where it could potentially, that boiling point could get there. Suspect intentionally uses overt physical actions, physical strength, or body movements to resist. Now keep in mind, I can't stress enough that this is after de-escalation tactics have been employed. Assaulted bodily harm, attempts to gain lawful control or countered by assault by the suspect. The scope and severity of the suspect's assault would not reasonably result in death or serious bodily harm. Again, that's officer's perception of the situation. And lastly, assaultive SBI, serious bodily injury or death. Suspects overt physical actions that reasonably pose imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury to officer or third party. Or, unfortunately, the outcomes could be many, many different things. So let's talk about what the appropriate, based off of this, the appropriate officer responses are. All right. So you have a compliant, cooperative individual. So we're going to use cooperative controls. And basically, don't get too caught up on this. This is communication. This is command presence. What command presence is, right? That officer or that subject is nice groomed, right? Empathy, sympathy, communicating, validating the person's issue, right? Lawful commands, right? Because we have the potential ourselves to increase the situation, escalate it. We try not to do that. And the person's cooperative. So, the communication aspect of it. Officers maintain or gain compliance using command presence. Command presence is just that appearance, right? Validating. Mutual respect. That's the number one thing I teach recruits, is respect. Okay? Quick example of that is you get a call for a homeless individual that's on the ground sleeping, somebody wants that person removed, right? My first thing comes to mind, that person needs help, okay? Am I gonna walk up to that person, use my foot to wake them up? That's degrading, right? That's inhumane. Go down to that person's level, see if they need help, okay? That's one thing I teach, that we all teach. Contact controls, all right, we talked about, this isn't to a point where this is like a firm grasp, physical, like you're putting pressure on somebody. This is just maybe guidance, okay? Contact controls, tactical strategies to gain control through hands-on technique. Okay, it sounds a little worse than what it is. The primary force component includes leverage, strategic stabilization, and direction. Okay, come with me this way. Compliance techniques. This is where things kind of, in that volatile situation, for me this is one of the most important ones out of this whole entire use of force. And we'll talk about some of the tools that we have to utilize for those things. But compliance techniques, non-weapon grabs, holds, pressure points, joint locks, non-deadly weapons, or a combination as needed.
And pinches. Pinches, yeah. So, Jensen, you really just shown, so some of the compliance techniques, I know I saw some people doing it, a wrist lock. Is that you, sir? A wrist lock, okay? So, yeah, come on over here.
You
Compliance technique, don't you do it to me, all right? You can do it to me. It's just a compliance technique, and what they mean is, it's to do it to get compliance out of an individual. And all it really is it's joint manipulation, okay? That's what it comes down to, all right? Don't try it at home, don't do it, but that's what it comes down to, all right? That's all a compliance technique really is to gain compliance, okay? Not to injure somebody.
Keep in mind that the pressure I utilized was obviously an example to show you what that can do, and it's just a very, very nutshell explanation of that. It's not a constant pressure, right? Because I have to continue assessing the individual. So if that light pressure at that point, I have to assess continuously what he's doing. So then if he becomes compliant, I'm not going to continue utilizing that wrist lock if the person's doing what I want them to do or asking them to do lawfully. Okay? It's a utilization, but it's not, none of this stuff is a form of punishment. Everything that you see on this table here is not intended for punishment. Okay? Just want to kind of,
when it comes to reporting this stuff, it has to do with intent and intensity, the two eyes. Okay, what was your intent and the intensity of it, okay? That is what it comes down to when it comes to compliance techniques. Good? Yep.
Defensive tactics, all right? And somebody was asking me earlier during break about a course for defensive tactics. We'll discuss that later on. Defensive tactics, all right? This is when a subject or subjects are starting to become assaultive towards the officers or somebody else, right? We have to intervene. We have to step in that sense. Now, one thing I want to kind of express. Do I have to wait to get punched in the face in order to act on that? But I best assure articulate my feelings of what that situation is. If I genuinely feel that I'm placed in imminent assault, for example, what are body cues, right? Someone pacing back and forth. I know I'm doing it in the classroom, but someone pacing back and forth, right? These actions, okay? This isn't just defining all the stuff, right? People rolling up their sleeves, people taking off layers of clothing. Remember when I was in high school, people would take off their earrings, let's go, right? So, again, I can't emphasize enough that de-escalation tactics may or may not be feasible. Okay, if I can prevent that, hey, separation, listen, man, I need you to calm down. Just turn around, put your hands behind your back. Okay? As soon as I see that, I'm going to go, okay, game on, right? Okay, so that's me being reasonable, utilizing the options that I have available to me until it gets to that point where I fear that assault. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so no, you don't have to wait, but you better be sure to articulate everything of what you feel. I was scared. It's okay to be scared as a police officer. I was in fear that I was going to be assaulted, right? Utilize defensive tactics, palm heel strikes, elbow strikes, knee strikes, right? Personal hands, weapons, or we'll get into that afterwards, or as far as tools. Then lastly, again, this is something that nobody wants to be in a situation, and if it gets to that point where it's lethal, hopefully it ends in this, and that's the goal of everything. It's very, very simple. That same justification as far as articulating that situation may be dangerous to yourself, lethal, or towards others, right? Deadly force. Now, one question that comes up, do you shoot to kill, right? God forbid, that type of situation. Now, Leslie, you want to answer that one, or?
So I think that's a big misconception. Everyone says, look, you shoot to kill. No, you shoot to stop a threat, is what it comes down to. Okay, that's what it comes down to. You shoot to stop a threat. All right, we don't carry 31 rounds and unload 31 rounds in someone just because. You shoot to stop a threat. That's what we're trained to do. All right, that's people seem to say that. And I always get that question asked. It's you shoot to stop a threat. It's the same thing we use of force. You're gaining compliance, but if there's a threat there too, you're also using it to stop that threat to gain compliance. All right.
It's just it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate outcome that could potentially happen when it gets to that level of that deadly force, right? Just like I said earlier in the slideshow, to stop the assault that's going on.
There we go. Blending already. Okay, review it. Go ahead. You want to review it?
Yep. All right. So our threat perception categories. One thing about this one, tactical. Another good example. How many people have had to walk in a dark parking lot to get to their car, and it might not feel like the safest type of situation. So, sorry, I don't have a set of keys on me. You put the keys in your wrist. Anybody messes with me today, yeah. So that kind of defines what preparing yourself for a situation like that. Now, we don't have to go into the concept of that always being that, oh my God, every single situation is going to be that, but it's basically preparing ourselves. So threat perception categories at the very beginning, we're strategic, even throughout the whole entire thing. Tactical, volatile, harmful, lethal, right? Subject actions, someone's compliant, passive resistant, they're not really pulling away or using mechanical or physical force, but they're not initially complying to what your lawful command is. Actively resistant, someone who's using physical or mechanical means to prevent themselves from being placed in custody. Assaulted bodily harm, someone who you perceive to be assaultive towards you, or maybe is currently being assaulted towards you. And assaultive serious bodily harm or death, that very lethal situation. Officer responses, cooperative controls, command presence, communication, contact controls, guidance, hey, come with me, just want to get you out of the situation. Compliance techniques, your wrist locks, your rear wrist locks. Offensive tactics, could be utilization of your palm heel strikes, elbow strikes, knee strikes. And after this, we'll get into some of the stuff that we're able to do as well too. And then unfortunately, your deadly force type of situation.
Any questions when it comes to the use of force continuum? No?
I just
I
got
do.
Good.
I have one. So, if let me say for example, an individual is licensed to carry, and they see an officer in imminent danger, where a firearm is being used, is that person allowed to help that officer with a use of firearm or no?
So that just happened somewhere. I remember seeing a video on that.
I think it was in Texas.
Was it in Texas?
Yeah.
You remember seeing that? And yeah, so was someone in fear of severe bodily injury and or death and you help the officer? Yeah, you'd be good. You'd be good all day long.
So in that case, if the person should help the officer, what should they do so that as to protect themselves? You know, in case, you know, because if officers come to a scene where an officer is being shot at, of course, anyone with a gun is a suspect at that point. So what should an individual do to better protect themselves if they, let me say they find themselves in a situation like that where they're trying to help an officer without being in trouble or being shot at?
Well, when other officers respond, what do you think the first thing those other officers
Yeah,
say to
yeah,
do?
you shut it down.
Drop the weapon. And what should you probably do?
Drop the weapon.
Drop the weapon,
Yeah.
right? Because we don't know, right? We're going into a chaotic scene that we need to get control of, right? Especially something like that. So, yeah, you're going to be good all day long, but understand where we're coming from, all right?
I couldn't understand.
Because the other big thing too is, you know, most of you guys live in the city of Worcester. When you guys see a person with a gun, what do?
You stay away.
Or
Or you call them.
call police, right? But can some people have guns out there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we live in the Northeast. We don't live down south, right? Where a lot of people carry guns. So the culture is a lot different up here, right? So unfortunately, in some of the classes I have, they're like, oh, you know, how should I carry my gun? On a holster on your person, and probably, you know, cover it up. And they're like, well, do we have to cover it up? And no, you don't. Okay, you can, but just understand, when someone up here sees someone with a gun, the first thing they do is, yep, police, yep, guys got a gun on the street. And what do you think happens? You're gonna have an interaction with the police, okay? And then sometimes you get these altercations where like, oh, it's my right to have a gun. It is, you're absolutely right. But we don't know that, do we? We're arriving on a scene and we get a call for a guy with a gun.
Yeah.
Understand that. Until we figure the whole situation out, investigatory, we investigate what's going on, that'll be good. Do you see what I'm saying there? That'll be good. All right, excellent. I like the question. Anything else?
Just a technical one. What does the MPTC actually stand for?
Go ahead. Mass Police Training Council.
Mass Police Training Council. They basically govern everything that happens in the state of Massachusetts when it comes to law enforcement, along with POST and BTC Training Council. They basically, so all this stuff is theirs. We don't, like, the department doesn't put this stuff together and say, we're gonna make up our own use of force model.
Okay.
No, that's not what we do. We follow all their standards, okay?
Got it.
Oh, last question.
Yep.
Related to LTC, right? So, if someone has like a certificate from a school like other than the Worcester Police, right? How long can that certificate be useful?
I don't know where it's from. If it's a basic firearm safety course, is that what you're talking about?
Mhm.
Yeah, look at the bottom right-hand corner. It should have an expiration date on it.
Okay. All
All right, I don't think they expire, but just look at that, depending on where they come from,
Okay.
okay?
All right. Appreciate it.
So this is, we're getting close to tonight, as far as any other questions that's going on. But one thing I just wanted to touch upon is, listen, this class could really take a full 8 hours or even more block. In a nutshell, you know, maybe 2.5 hours that we've touched upon today is, you know, the best that we could kind of show you and explain to you certain things. You're gonna have a lot of questions. If they do come up, we're happy to answer for them. I just didn't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, we can. So before we get that, do we have any questions in regards to it's a lot in a short period of time, okay? It truly is. I hope we answered some of your questions when it comes to this, all right? Just understand the big words, the totality of the circumstances, everything that happened around it, okay? An objective, reasonable standard is what I call Graham versus Connor for excessive force, the amount of force used at the time, all right? And just the entire model here, the threat perception. Understand that we do things based on the threat perception categories, okay? And they have perception, huge word, correct? So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into this, and this could be, it's almost like a 16-hour class with some of the recruits, but there's a lot. If there are any questions at all in regards to any of this? No? All right, you want to skip to that?
Yeah, this is continued throughout the 32-year career that you can go through. So, I just want to talk about real quick, a lot of people are curious as to what we carry, and this is basically set up what we have as far as the gear that we give. So somebody talked about muscle memory earlier, and the way that we set this up is the same for each recruit that comes into this building that trains for their 6 months academy. Reason why we build that muscle memory is so that when they have to deal with a potential situation, they automatically know where that stuff is on their gear, so they don't have to focus so much on that, and they're focusing on whatever is placed in front of them. As far as use of force option, we talked about defensive tactics. I'm actually going to work from the top to the bottom a little bit. Actually, no, I'm going to scratch that. I like to change my mind. Most of the stuff that we use, obviously with the exception of like basic escort positions, and again, remember, you know, you're guiding somebody over here. Those compliance techniques, just like what I did to Officer Joinville, very minimally, you apply that little pressure, right? It's pressure points that you utilize on people. Those are things that you can use as well too. But as far as tools, we have policy in our department, and that's going to be a whole other class if we ever get to that point. But we have what's called our OC spray. And just kind of for safety reasons, everything in here is not real. Got a glue gun, fake pepper spray. We have the real baton, we're not going to use. Taser with no battery with inert cartridges in it, and then we have no magazines. So for someone who's level 3, or someone that we perceive to be level 3, actively resistant, for a compliance technique, the option for that OC spray, that stands for oleo resin capsicum spray. It's pepper spray. I don't like it. It hurts nonetheless. But this is something that can be utilized for a subject who we perceive to be actively resistant, right? After several commands, they're not complying with us. Maybe they're under arrest, they're refusing to be placed under arrest. They're using that physical mechanical means, right? It's an option. Nothing here is 100%, right? If we could do something else, we'll try it. But sometimes this is something that we have available to us. That's why we have so many tools, is because nothing's 100%.
Do they spray it?
I'm sorry?
Do they spray it in your face during training?
Yes. Reason why you get sprayed is so that
Good question.
you have a better understanding of how effective and how awful it is. So you can make the appropriate decision whether or not this is something I want to utilize. Like, I've experienced it, okay? I know how it feels. If I'm placed in a situation where someone is actively resistant, and I know, hey, the only way to get this person to comply is by utilizing this, I know how it feels, right? It also gives me credibility at court, because I've experienced it, right? And I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't want to use something on someone that can be painful that I have no understanding of, right? So the OC spray, our taser, this is something that I actually had set up for us, but maybe at another time. Again, no battery in the taser. These are inert cartridges. They don't shoot out, so this is not an active taser, even though it is a taser. This is something that we have the option to utilize with caveats. On a subject, via policy from our department, someone who is actively resistant, the only way that we could use this taser is what's called a drive stun. And basically what that produces is isolated pain in a certain area, preferably a muscle area. At no point in time are we allowed to deploy probes on someone who only meets this criteria, okay? And we do a lot of training with the taser when it comes to that. And all of us here have been tased, and we also understand and know how difficult it is. On a side note, if I had the option, I'd take this taser all day long over that OC spray. The baton, believe it or not, could be utilized as a compliance technique. And that does not mean that you could strike someone with the baton, but I could use my baton as leverage, manipulation to assist me in gaining that compliance from that subject, right? So in no shape or form can I strike the person who's only meets this criteria, but I can utilize this also for pressure points if I need to, things of that nature. But also understand that we have to train with this stuff, and by me introducing this to that situation, and now this gets out of my hand and into a subject's hand, I kind of created that situation to to increase. That's why the training is important, and you also have to have that confidence in deciding whether or not it's something that you want to utilize or not. As far as an assaultive subject, we talked about the hand strikes, elbow strikes, knee strikes. Basically, you're fighting situations. The taser, this is when you can utilize that probe deployment on a subject to deliver a 5-second cycle. It does it automatically. That is if that connection is made, right? How hard is it to hit a moving target, especially when you have clothing and stuff like that? That's why nothing here is 100%. But what that does, and I had a whole setup as to explaining the taser a little more in depth, it's called NMI, neuromuscular incapacitation. And when that probe deployment is, the bigger the spread, the more it affects the body. The ability for limbs to be moving is still there. Whether, you know, if you have a smaller spread, it's less effective. A larger spread is more effective, right? We also train our officers to, as that 5-second cycle is going in, to attempt to make that apprehension. Because if we wait for that 5-second cycle to happen, and that person continues to be assaultive, I may have to deliver that secondary 5-second cycle. We want to try to minimize that at all costs. We don't want to deliver more than we have to, okay? And then obviously lethal force could be a variance, most typically with the firearm. Lastly, what I want to add to this is that this, and this can be de-escalation. By simply taking the taser out and not utilizing it may be enough to compel somebody to do what you want them to do. I've been sprayed by OC spray. I don't want to get sprayed again. Somebody takes that OC spray out and I'm doing something wrong, I'm going to comply. Okay? That is why it's so important for us to continue to assess the situation. Okay? I may be at this point where I may be ready to use that taser and he may start to comply. Can I then probe deploy a person who's compliant? No. Okay? So those are a brief description of how quick you have to think on this job and how you have to come up to that right decision. Okay. Basically. Good. All right. So like I said, use of force continuum, it's huge. We go through a lot of training with this stuff. All right, it's always evolving, okay? And we talked about that earlier, so I mentioned that. They added more slides in over time, something happens, they figure something out, we throw more slides in, it's more training, more training, more training. We're always training on this stuff, okay? We constantly review this every single year, okay, because it's something that we need to know, all right? Our officers need to know that stuff. And in my opinion, we do a really good job at it, okay? I think we really do a really good job at it. Our reporting has been much stronger now than it's ever been, based on some of this stuff, and you know, it's only going to get better in time with the more we train.